Hey, it's Andrew here, and welcome to the E-commerce Fuel podcast, the show dedicated to helping 7- and 8-figure brand owners build incredible businesses and amazing lives. And today on the show, have a founder with a really interesting story. Someone I got connected to recently that has built a business around training your brain, improving it, being able to really shape it and be intentional about its growth and development in ways that can help from everything from unplugging from work. All of us at some point, I'm sure, have been trying to go to bed at night and you can't because your brain is racing. You're trying to think about things, to being able to make better decisions, to sleeping better, and a lot of other different potential benefits that come with it. And super excited to have Paola Telfer, who's the founder of Sens.ai. If you want to check it out online, it's spelled Sens.ai as the top level domain, which is a tool that does all the things I just talked about. Anyway, it's a fascinating topic, one I know almost nothing about. And so when I saw her brand, her story, wanted to have her on to talk about, we'll dive into some e-commerce facets of it, but just the neuro training and the brain science behind it, which I think is fascinating and something that has had an impact on her life personally. So Paula, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah. And I figured we could start out with kind of your story about how you developed this product. Maybe before we even go back into your story, give people a sense, because I did a terrible job. It's a good thing I'm not in your marketing department for queuing this up. Give people a sense of what Sens.ai is, kind of what it looks like in a physical form, and then also what it does and helps people with.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a wearable, so it's a neurotechnology wearable. I'm holding it up if you've got the video in front of you, and it's also an app, and it's a gamified app. And at a very high level, I would say it is a gamified journey into exploring the inner workings of your mind. That's really what it is. It gives you guardrails for all the things that you mentioned. So all the way from, I've got brain fog, I've got sleep issues, stress management, and then even some inner work. So whether it's, rewiring some old stories, some of our mental habits, and then some advanced meditation stuff. And now from an entrepreneur perspective, it unlocks into creativity and mindfulness and some of that sort of inner source of creativity and insight that we might bring into our work. So that's Sens.ai in a nutshell.
Got it. So when we first started talking, and again, if you're listening on the audio, you can't see it, see what Sens.ai is, but it's almost like a very intense set of over the ear headphones, right? It's almost like a really nice pair of Bose headphones, but with a larger kind of top to them. And when I first heard about this product, I was like, so does this like plug into your brain? Like, does it like have probes going? Like you just don't know, right? But from what we talked about, it doesn't. It can sense certain brainwaves from what you've said. It gives you kind of cues. And can you explain how it actually works? And then after that, maybe we can go into the field of neurofeedback and what that neurofeedback training, what that actually means. But talk, if you would, a little bit about the device, how it works, and then how that ties into the field in general and the philosophy there.
Yeah, let's see if I can do it together. So neurotechnology sort of generally is to do with technology for reading or changing the brain. Neuromodulation would be the umbrella term. So it's about changing the brainwave patterns, right? And so when we think of neurotechnology, I think of it in three ways. There's a way that you can stimulate the brain and you can change it in that day. So you might have seen electrical stimulation. There's light stimulation, audiovisual entrainment. These are ways to change the brain temporarily, right? So now I would liken it to having a glass of wine or a cup of coffee. You're going to have a state change. We know how to change states. We have some go-tos, right? There's another form of neurotechnology, which is more training the brain. And so training the brain, I would liken it to meditation practice. Over time, you're going to change traits. And so that's the category where neurofeedback comes in. So now, so I'll leave it at that and I'll come back to how that works. And then the last one I would say is measuring the brain, right? And so measuring the brain is how is the brain functioning? You could look at the power of different brainwave bands. You could look at the synchrony of different brain waves. So that means how in time, how in time are they? So if you were looking at like waves, like how closely aligned are they in time? Are they moving up and down together, right? And so in Sensei, what we've done is we included all three. So we think about it and we talk about it as boost, that's stimulation, train, that's the neurofeedback and the heart rate variability training, and assess, which is using event-related potential methodology. Now, all of that's a little bit of a mouthful. So neurofeedback is the core of what Sensei does. We're really trying to use tech in service of mental wellness and really trying to accelerate the benefits of meditation. And so the way neurofeedback works is it just reads the brain waves. So you were asking, what is the contraption doing? Neurofeedback uses electrodes at your skull, and then it's reading the brainwave patterns. And then it's feeding them back to you in a way that is a bit of a dance. It's real time. You're in milliseconds delay. There's nothing between you and your brainwaves, which are essentially feeding back to you your mental state. You can think of it like a mirror for the mind. And so this develops this self-awareness, this ability to self-regulate your mental state.
Tell the story, if you would, about how you got into this field and how this type of work and technology and tool was pretty instrumental in your business career. And because there's a point where you kind of had a pretty big crisis moment in that journey.
Yeah. I mean, I always had an interest in the medical field. There was early years, I wanted to be a doctor. I ended up studying electrical engineering. But through my life journey, I was always in a spiritual sort of upbringing environment. My parents encouraged me to explore different spiritual traditions. And we always had a meditation room in the house. So growing up, in that environment, and having this electrical engineering sort of way of thinking of things, kind of led me down this path. But the instrumental event that you mentioned, it was a motor vehicle accident, and it was when I had just branched out of corporate and started my own business. So very recently launched a business in technology. And then I got rear-ended, and it pulled the rug out from under me when everything was going smoothly in my life, and I had just made this big change. And it made me rethink everything. So I encountered neurotechnology, and it was the impetus for creating Sensei, because I thought there's a gap here. I've had some powerful benefit from this experience in a clinical environment, but there's a lot of potential for this, for peak performance, for developing your meditation practice, for entrepreneurs to develop greater insight into their work. There's so many potentials here. Why can't we make this smaller, cheaper, more accessible?
And when you think about designing something like this, and the brain, is a lot of how much of the product and the field is based on research, or is it how much research is there? Is that something that informs a lot of the product design and what you're doing? How much of it is a field that, and not to say it means it would be illegitimate, but that it's harder to get the data on? How data driven is this field? I guess at a high level.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. So neurofeedback, let's say early days were, maybe it's like 50, 60 years old, right? So from its invention, from when people started playing around with it. And, you can see early videos online of John Lennon doing alpha brainwave training, early, like that sort of stuff, right? So it's very that sort of movement that was a little hippie-ish. And then it's evolved since then. So there are studies, but if you look at it with scientific rigor and you're like, are these, controlled, blind, studies, randomly controlled studies, and are they done at scale, like with thousands of people? that's lacking. That's lacking. And it's actually one of the reasons why we thought there was a place for Sensei to contribute to this field. So, so in creating something like this, one of the observations I had is that I could go to different clinics and have very different experiences. And it mattered very much who the clinician was. And so it became my mission to figure out in the last 5 years, where does the knowledge reside? What is fact and what are hypotheses? And there's a lot of knowledge that would reside with people who are, in the clinical space, have been doing it for decades, and they mentor everyone else. One of my advisors, Jay Gunkelman, he's one of the pioneers in the field. He happened to have an early company, back in the very beginning, where he actually would have a service for clinicians where he would take in the EEG, do the analysis, and then send it back. So he's an absolute pro at analysis. So my mission was, how do I figure out where these pros are that know everything, but it's not systematized in any system? And can we systematize that? Right. So we took great care to do so.
And you touched on a little bit that after you had the accident, it helped you with a lot of things. But could you dive a little more into that anecdotally? I mean, I think I mentioned when we talked earlier, you had said how after that accident, like you couldn't focus, you couldn't manage your team, you couldn't work. And then what was it about this technology or this approach that, like, what did it do for you to help you recover from that accident? Talk about that if you would a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because, it sounds medical. A recovery from an accident sounds medical, but it was actually so much more profound than that. So I did have a concussion. I had PTSD, and I couldn't get into a vehicle without closing my eyes if somebody else was driving, or if it was my husband yelling at him, right? And I couldn't. I was just so my whole body would spasm. And I would have, my son was 6 at the time. And if he would come up behind me, I would have a similar response. Right. And it's just a terrible place to be. I couldn't really perform as a mother, and as a leader. I was running another company. And to a point where, I was so driven and wanted to maintain that company and do my best for that company that I was lying on the ground, taking phone calls, writing down things I couldn't remember that I needed to say on that call, right? Like I'd kind of rehearsed and thought, these are the things we need to achieve on this call, and I have to be on this call. And, it was not doing really my recovery any service. And so, what actually helped me was a bit of a nervous system reset, right? And that has to do with heart coherence, and it has to do with improving my alpha brainwaves. So that's sort of like the beginnings of resetting the nervous system, right? So that's diving a little bit technical, but that informed the beginnings of the Sensei gamification. Is that the first thing you got to do is reestablish the mind-body connection and get back into control of, your heart rate, your reactivity, and it's possible to train that. So that's the first piece.
So does it give you, it lets you know what's happening in your brain in terms of different different wavelengths or different states of the brain. And maybe you can walk through those. Yeah. What are the different states? Because those are measurable, right? Like scientifically measurable.
That's right. And so the brainwaves, what they are, they're named after, they're using the Greek alphabet, right? So you would have heard them from fastest to slowest. They're gamma, beta, alpha, theta, and delta. So there's 5 bands. And they're bands because they're a range of frequencies. So we know, for example, that if you're very beta dominant, like at this moment we probably are, we're very externally focused. Our senses are bringing new information into our brain. Our brain is functioning in a way that is looking for new information externally. We're kind of scanning our environment. If we get into very hyper beta, we might be stuck in a hypervigilant state, like a PTSD. And then we become a little bit overly sensitive. And that's why the Sensei system was designed to train mental flexibility. We train not just beta, but how to shift out of it into alpha, gamma alpha, etc.
So beta, or the hyper beta, when I'm laying awake at 2 in the morning
Yes.
because I can't turn my brain off, that's because I'm stuck in that mode in my brain for whatever reason.
Yes. And what
Okay.
might be familiar to you is sometimes the term is used, inner narrative or inner chatter or inner critic, and so that's that mind wandering as well. So when you try and sit to meditate is when you can probably see it more clearly.
So how does it actually work if I'm wearing Sensei? The goal being, of course, I'm guessing, to be able to be more intentional. You can't be intentional about changing what you're thinking about, or any kind of state, whether it's mental or physical, unless you're aware of it, right? So this gives you a sense of that. But how does that actually work in practice? If I put Sensei on, I'm trying to think about how would a session of Sensei work, for example, to get me out of that hyper beta mode into a different mode that's more calmer, more relaxed, maybe more creative. I'm not sure if that's actually true, but how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, within a given session, let's say it's 15 minutes long, it starts, let's say you're doing the brain training. We actually stack it. So because we have all the various technologies systematized, we would stack it so that there is a boost first. So it's a light stimulation. And that light stimulation would have a meditation recommended with it. And so we only have like 15 like really powerful transformative meditations. So let's say the meditation is gratitude, right? And you're going to train gamma. Okay? Like that really high, the highest, fastest frequency, which is associated with very expansive thinking. Right? It's what's detected in very advanced meditators, and it's detected in high power and in synchrony. And that boost might be about 15 minutes as well. And it would come with the gratitude track, because the gratitude psychological aspect puts you into gamma as well. So now you've got a lot of purposefully stacked psychological elements, stimulation elements, and training elements. So that now what we're doing during the training is we're going to be rewarding you. And let's say it's a visual, it's open eyes, so it's visual and it's sound, and there would be a piano sound every time that your gamma is past a certain threshold. So you want to increase the volume of the pianos, and you want to increase the frequency of the piano sound.
And how do you actually get into that state? If you're going and you want to build muscle, you go to the gym, you practice, you eat well, and you
Precisely.
lift heavy weights. How do you, like for gamma, for example, which sounds like that mindset, if you can expand the amount of time your brain is operating in that, potentially it helps you become more theoretical and kind of more strategic. But how do you actually intentionally get your brain to focus on that? Is you said gratitude, like is thinking through gratitude, does it put you in that state and you can just feel that more, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, let's break it up into the primer, which is the boost, and then the training. So in the primer, which is the boost, you can think of it as you're about to climb a mountain, and then the primer, which is the boost, takes you at the top, like with a helicopter. And so now you know what state you want to get into. You feel it already, right? So it's a little bit of a cheat, but it also is a boost. It's exactly a boost, right? So it kind of helps you along. And the gratitude talk track will actually naturally also amplify that sort of state. Gratitude puts you into a state that is gamma related. The way training starts is that it will actually look at your gamma power and your gamma synchrony, and it'll get a baseline in the beginning. So now your baseline is already higher because you just did the primer. So so it's actually it's helpful. And now we're going to train you based on how much higher you can take that baseline. So what you actually need to do is not be in analytical thought, right? Analytical thought, you're back in beta and you're in mind wandering. So you're trying to control it. So it's actually a surrender exercise of just saying, I want more piano sounds. I like piano sounds. And if you don't like piano, you can change it. Right. And there's visuals that are like, it's an interstellar travel theme. So there's like a visual and you're trying to make certain things light up in the screen. And then, so you're willing it, but you're willing it in a way that you're immersed with the visuals and you're immersed with the audio, not in a way that you're thinking through it. So it's really hard to describe. But the idea is the same as, it's referred to as operant conditioning. And it's similar to if you were training your dog to shake a paw, right? So every time he lifts, he does the action, then you give him a reward. And that's what you are experiencing. And the rewards are the visual rewards and the sound rewards.
So is it a subconscious thing? Like, are you training the subconscious mind to be able to go there? Or
Yes.
Once you get out of that boost phase, are you saying, for example, hey, try to focus on this or try not to be analytical? And then can you do anything intentionally to steer towards that gamma state? Or do you actually have to really subconsciously just let your brain do it? Just like the Pavlovian dog kind of.
Yeah.
idea?
It's a tricky question to answer, but because for most people, they really just need to let the sounds do the work and let yourself surrender into the sounds. Now, if you happen to have been meditating for a really long time, it will feel very familiar. So gamma, as an example, will feel like gratitude, or it'll feel like loving kindness, right? So if you can get into that state, it will challenge you more and more and more and more, and it'll take you deeper into a pretty exquisite experience. So for meditators, it might have a very different difficulty level if you want it to be that way.
Interesting. How do you know it works from a data perspective? Is it because you've got a lot of people that have used this? Have you put it through scientific studies? Do you have a kind of a library of data that can show pre and post? How do you know it's working?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So what's really cool, I mean, we went, started delivering to like real users that, don't know me, right? Before we were with beta users, about 6 months ago. So we have about 3,000 people on the platform. And yeah, that was always part of the design. Part of the design was not just to boost and train, but also to assess. And so the assessments that we do are based on event-related potential methodology. And that is, something they use in labs to see whether a brain intervention worked or didn't work. And so the way we do it is it's this 10-minute test, and you're pushing, a left or right button. And while you're doing that test, you have the headset on, and it's actually measuring a known pattern of the brain, which is how it perceives new information. And so we do this test before you do, a month of a particular, we call it mission, a course. Let's say you're trying to improve your sleep. And we do it again a month in, we do it again at the end, right? And most missions are 2 months. And so then what we're measuring that is interesting is trait changes in the brain's function. And that includes the speed of processing. So the speed of processing new information is a very good biomarker for how well you're functioning, actually. And that only usually declines over time. And so as an example, now that we have some data with the sleep mission, which is our most popular mission, no surprise, we're improving that by like 7.5%. So speed of thinking and reaction time both actually are being improved by about 7.5% on the sleep mission with our first cohort.
Fascinating. How total changing of direction here from a manufacturing side of things. I think the people I have talked to that have gone in and made their own products that by far have had the most problems and headaches and lifelong regrets about their chosen course have been people who've manufactured electronics, right? Like it's just, I don't want to say it's without fail, but it's not common that you have people come back making something a consumer electronic that don't have some heartburn or some pretty big battle scars. Was that the case with designing Sensei for you? How'd that process go?
Yeah, I mean, and throw in a pandemic, right, and the supply chain shortage. That was crazy. I've met with my electrical engineering colleagues from back in my bachelor's, and they were really impressed. They're like, "Oh, you went into hardware. I can't believe it," because it was always known hardware is hard, right? So I was much more in software in the past, and I think it's about finding the right partners. I definitely think that we were very ambitious, and my CTO and co-founder would he always says to me that we could have done something so much easier. but it's a very complex system, right? So there is no shortage of technological challenges that we're like, yeah, we can do that, including the electrodes, and putting together, boost, train, and assess, and the millisecond, sort of precision on this thing, doing it, everything at home. So yeah, I mean, we had to redesign on the fly a number of times. Like, we were late to deliver. It was massively stressful for our core team. We were with the early devices, we were delivering it to our homes. We were gathering together on weekends and like checking them all, modifying the quality assurance documents ourselves, working like hand in hand with the manufacturer. We know way too much about manufacturing now, like more than we should have. But in the process, I think there was a decision point where we're like, okay, are we with this partner for a long term, right? Like, mistakes were made on many fronts, on our side, their side, all of it. It was all a challenge. And we were like, yes, you know what? We are with them long term. And so we're going to meet part way on some of this. We're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to jump in with them. And even, I'll share with you a really tangible piece is, there was a lot of maybe like 8 hours versus the 2 hours projected of hand assembly required for some of the complexities of what we ended up doing. So there's a lot of extra cost, right? And so there was a decision point where I had to say, you know what? Our contract doesn't demand us to pay that, but we're going to meet you part way because we're in it together for the long term. And so that was part of the learning. It's like, are we going to be able to stick to our core values, live, be a partner, like, and ethically conduct ourselves, and actually use this to strengthen the relationship? And we did. So we're very pleased now with our partner, and looking back, it's like, wow, I can't believe we went through those sleepless nights.
Yeah. I got some training for you if you need it to help with that. Do you, for funding the business, something like this, you've got a team, you've got a lot of technical expertise. Was this something you got funded by, you took investors on, that you raised money for? Because it seems like, there's a tremendous amount, it would seem, of upfront costs for this. So how did you fund it?
Yeah, we did. We have venture backing. We also have a lot of family offices. So early on, it was friends and family, like you would expect. We've done about, I think we'd say 3 rounds. And sure, it became hard in the last couple of years. Like, all of a sudden, there was like this, right? There's like this major shift in the risk tolerance in the market, and I think it was kind of similar to the manufacturer. It's like, are we in this together for the long haul? So I went back to my investor group, and do we believe in this? This is the course. This is the mission we're committed to. And boy, Jeff, Corey, and I, that are the leadership team, we're all in. Right. So we're living and breathing this, and this is our life's work. Right. So are you guys in it with us? And if you are, let's all commit again financially. Right. So we were able to raise around probably about 18 months ago, again, with the same group of investors who, figuratively sort of doubled down. And so that's been actually quite a bond for us with them. Like, they're really, really in our court.
Yeah. How do you, raising money is difficult in the best of times, right? And with products that are very straightforward. How do you think about, with a product like this, which is more abstract, and maybe abstract isn't the right word, it's something that it's not familiar for people. It's harder for people to wrap their heads around. It's also a field where I think you could definitely make up things more easily than you would with other fields, because people aren't as familiar with it. Point being, how do you communicate to investors that this is a really worthwhile technology to take a bet on? And also, how do you communicate to customers when you're marketing it to them that this is worth the investment? How do you do that well?
Yeah. Okay, let's split those into two.
Yeah.
The marketing one's a little more challenging, but with the investor one, I'll share a story. So for this last round, it wasn't going to be enough to just keep the current investors. They needed to bring on some of their friends, right? Some people that they had already done business with. But of course, everybody's, there's a personal brand risk. We hadn't finished manufacturing. You're right; it's not tangible or familiar. And so what we did, because I asked myself the same question, is we decided to hold an event, and it was an investor invite only event. We held it, hosted by one of our lead investors at a country club in Florida, and then we invited the other potential investors who were in for a minimum amount, so they were going to be serious investors, and they could invite any representative they wanted. Their trusted biohacker friend, their their neurosurgeon. These are real examples, right? Like all the guys that were going to be the most tough on us and have the best questions and have already seen stuff like this before. They know what to compare us to. And so that's what we did. And we hosted about five people. And then we put them through an intense program for about 4 days. But we said, you have to stick with us all day. And you're going to probably do about 4 hours a day of brain training with us. And we're going to bring in some of our advisors. So you're going to have doctors, neuropsychologists, et cetera, clinicians, right? And it's going to be, we're going to answer any questions, right? And we're going to be with you. And so that's what that was actually how we did the last round. And by doing that, that's how we had a resounding hell yes, let's do this, because they had transformative experiences. And some of them were really there for creativity. They're business leaders, right? And so they were like, then in those 4 days, they were impressed. So that was how you do it. The proof has to be in the pudding.
That's super cool. That's got to be so affirming as the leadership team, and also so cool to see the people come in for 4 days. Is a big ask. How did you get people? I mean, your existing investors, kind of maybe more so, but the people that are brand new. How do you convince someone, hey, show up for 4 days and we're going to do this brain technology, which people may or may not be on board with. That's, I mean, if you can get them there and prove them, makes a lot of sense. But even getting them there for 4 days is super impressive.
Yeah. Well, they were coming on behalf of investors who were already interested. So they'd already heard the pitch deck and, we'd already had a talk. And now they were like, okay, I got to see this, but maybe I'm not the best guy. I'm going to send someone to go and experience this. That's one. And then, kind of good segue into marketing is we made a nice brochure that, was VIP only, invite only, right? And it's free for you, but it would normally be a pretty high value, right? So the doctors that were there with me would normally offer something like this in the, maybe 15 grand sort of range. So it was free, right? So
interesting. What is the price of Sensei?
Sensei's $1,500, I think, US.
$1,500.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. I mean, even if you had a videography crew that just went to your 4-day event and did before and after, like the ultimate before and after testimonials of the people, coming in, and I'm sure you could, and maybe you did. You could have got some great footage.
We could have. Yeah, we did. Yeah. We didn't do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you touched on it maybe a little bit, but from a marketing perspective, how do you communicate that? Because obviously you're not going to be able to bring everyone on site for 4 days, and how do you convince people that have never heard of the product to spend $1,500 on this that is really powerful, but they don't know that. They don't know you. They haven't been there. What's the strategy?
It's really tough. And it's something we struggle with. And I think we will continue to struggle with. And one of the problems I think for us is we're really good at long form, detailed, meticulously crafted copy. So it's, whether it's Jeff, Dr. Mark Atkinson, and myself, we, are very, careful about the messaging because it's got a lot of depth and breadth. And it's very easy for it to sound very, vapid too, right? Like there's a lot of wellness talk, a lot of false claims, a lot of careless sort of wording. And so we have really held that very close, the messaging and the copy. And so you'll see things like more recent blogs that may be posted or very close to being posted are like, what is happiness? Right. And now we'll look at it from a scientific perspective, from a consciousness perspective. It's it's the beginnings of a book. Right. And Dr. Mark Atkinson actually wrote a book on happiness. Right. So there's that, there's more like the four sort of pathways to super consciousness. Right. So talking about plant medicine, talking about, all the different types of breathing, talking about meditation, and then neurofeedback is in that group. So now you can imagine, as those examples will show, there is a lot of depth of understanding of consciousness and mind. There's a lot of depth and understanding of neuroscience, medicine, right, and technology. And so for us to find people that we can partner with who are good at marketing, that will be able to take that content, not lose the integrity of it, and make it short form has been really difficult. It's been very difficult. I don't know if our expectations are too high, or maybe, we're just too early of a stage company to be able to hand that over. But it's an ongoing struggle, because you need to get people's attention. Right. So if we talk like e-commerce words, like top of funnel, you have to get their attention, and traditional marketing is based on fear, right? Or scarcity. Right. There's that's sort of the thinking process, and that's not our thinking process at all. And we don't want to lean into that. And so that's the ongoing sort of friction there.
So are you doing a lot of content marketing top of funnel to try to maybe you're not pushing Sensei out of the gates, but you're doing long form content, blogs, whatever it is about all those topics you just mentioned, which slowly leads people to the Sensei side? Is that the strategy?
Yeah. I mean, we have a marketing agency that we work with. It's not the first, no surprise, right? Like, so one of the things that this marketing agency does really well is they've actually used the headset. That was one of the requirements. I realized that's what I learned over time. They have to use it. They have to experience it. And so then once they did, they started leaning a little bit more into UGC. And then I thought, oh, that's a good idea. And then so part of what they did is one of the discoveries that they brought forward, which has been a consistent theme, is we get a lot of peak performers coming to us, but then a lot of people actually start with the sleep mission. So it's like this ongoing theme where everybody has trouble with sleep, and so they basically started a whole sort of campaign around sleep. Right. So that was the reason for that, is because we realized, oh my goodness, all our data is sleep. And then that's what our marketing team also found. And wow, okay, this is a problem that we can actually address, and we can actually address technically improving it, but we can actually speak to as well. So let's talk about sleep. So that's one of the campaigns. The other thing I would share too is it is a bit of learning from our community. So when we first started delivering, it was actually a bit scary to talk to the customers, right? Because it was like my baby, right? We put 5 years of research and development into it. And now finally some users were using it who, I didn't personally know. And then we decided to interview everyone. So I took calls with the first sort of maybe 50 users that were avid users. And I would bring in our customer care team, and then learn from them. How are you using it? How's it going? What are the pain points? All of that. And that also informed our marketing.
I'm going to take another hard right here, completely leave that behind. But I saw in kind of the pre-episode notes, you have an interest in how AI impacts education. You have a 14-year-old son, I believe. That's something I'm getting very curious in, getting ready to do some work with my kids who are anywhere from 6 to 11. And some of the AI tools out there are fascinating. I always wonder about just the structure of most schools. I mean, everyone's heard the spiel, they were kind of set up in like, Industrial Revolution, and do they really benefit kids? Well, there's a lot of great schools out there, but there's a lot of schools that also, and not for fault of the teachers. Like if I had to teach 28 kids or 25 kids, for 8 hours a day, I'm sure I'd do a lot of the same things. Anyway, all that to say, I think there's room for improvement, despite the best intentions of a lot of people. So what are you thinking about when you mentioned that? Like, how are you thinking about educating or helping your 14-year-old really think about education, think about some of the AI tools that are making that possible? I'd love to hear kind of riff on that for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, that's so top of mind for me right now. He's 14 going into grade 10 in September. And you know what? He's had great schooling so far. So early years he did Waldorf, and I guess in the last few years, he's been in a bit of an outdoor school. So they do backcountry stuff. They'll do, like skiing in the backcountry. There's just a lot of they carry all their camping gear, and they cook for themselves. And they'll do this for like 7 days, on some trips. And they're actually doing like winter camping. Like we have snow where we are right now. They're doing winter camping this year. So that's all really building leadership traits. And I think that's kind of where I look at him and I think, okay, what does the future hold? We really have no idea. I don't know, if there's going to be there probably won't be an abundance of jobs that we are currently familiar with right now. Right. I think that, traditionally, certainly back in my day, STEM, right? We've put everybody in, like, geared people towards STEM. I don't know if that's actually the right approach anymore, right? So, he did an electrical engineering boot camp last year, I think partly to please me, right? At a university that I went to, and I'm thinking, I don't know if it's actually in his interest to study electrical engineering anymore. I think that when you look at where AI is right now, I think there's room for one brilliant engineer who's going to run a whole bunch of LLMs, maybe, that they're going to be more of an architect, right? So if people are brilliant at it and they're going to be, exceptional leaders in that space and they love it, yes, I think if that's the way our son was, then I would say yes, go ahead and do that. But short of that, this is how I'm thinking of it. I'm thinking of it as there's all these different domains that we've broken education into, right? So there's math and there's physics, and then there's some soft sciences. They each sort of teach a different style of thinking, right? And so I think that in my mind, maybe a bit biased, but I think that math and physics are critical. I think math and physics are critical to learn how to problem solve. But I also think that the soft sciences are actually really important for his generation. And I think that's what will make them great leaders. So let's look at like history, right? Or behavioral psychology, right? Anthropology. These are fields that have a vast database of information that if he learns about the thinking process in each of them, that he can come to understand why things are the way they are. And I think that will help him to be able to be a leader across domains, to kind of be a domain buster, as one of my advisors would put it. So, and those are the people that will be able to lead in the age that's coming.
Yeah, interesting. I have some thoughts on that, slightly in kind of in the similar veins on the soft skilled side of things. If you do think AI is going to take a lot of the hard skills, I still think writing is incredibly important. Even if Chat GPT gets incredible, is able to write like Ernest Hemingway and the best of us, I still think it's an incredibly good skill to have, to be able to appreciate and to be able to communicate. But let's say, well, not let's say, AI is going to definitely take jobs. There's going to be so many jobs that are, and skills that are no longer needed, or needed by many fewer people. And so if that's the case, like the one thing I'm convinced that is going to take an extremely long time to be able to replicate is human connection, right? Soft skills, relationships, empathy. You can mimic empathy. I joke with my wife sometimes that like I have synthetic empathy, right? Because I can look at empathy is not my strong suit in terms of like deep wells of it. But I really do think like the robots are not going to get there for a while. So more and more, I'm trying to teach my kids and be really aware of social connections, how they connect with people, understanding the nuances in conversations. And I'll try to point things out to them. Like, hey, did you see how this happened in this? Like this person talked to this person for 5 minutes straight. Like, how do you think the other person felt? Like having these very candid private with them, of course, not in front of the people, but trying to help them understand the social dynamics. And then the other thing too is thinking about just making great decisions at a high level from risk and reward. I think that's going to be increasingly important. I was listening to an interview with Tony Robbins, and he wrote some book, I think, about all the top investors. And he said the number one thing that they all had in common was that they all cited taking, just being really good at taking asymmetric bets as their strength. And so one thing I've started doing with my kids is betting with them, teaching them to bet, which this is probably a very controversial opinion. Like a lot of people are like, wow, you're 11-year-old. You're playing, Connect Four and you're arguing over odds and betting with her. Wow. Great parenting, Andrew. But I have started doing this like, hey, I'll bet, I'll put a quarter on the line. I'll give you 10-1 odds on this game. And having her start to think about it, and think about, okay, I lost 5 times in a row, but then I beat him on the 6th. So it was like 10-1 odds. Is that a good bet? Because ultimately when you get down to it, like life is just a series of bets that you make on everything with maybe tiny or huge implications. But if you can make a lot of low downside, huge upside bets, your life is probably not going to be terrible. So
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. And I think there's an important point there in distinguishing what do we rely on the schools for? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And what are we responsible for at home? And so some of the stuff that we're like my husband and I are good at, we can do at home. So the brain training stuff and mind training, whether with Sensei or not, we're actually quite good at. And so with our son, I would encourage him to feel deeply and to be very self-aware of what he's feeling. And that is more of a learning of not suppressing emotions, welcoming emotions, and being fully alive. And that's even if he's angry at a friend for something, letting that sort of flow through him, welcoming that, being aware of it, as opposed to trying to turn it away. And so that I think is really beneficial for him. And I guess the other piece, not to be understated with this generation, is at the command of our attention, right? So, there's, and this is why the brain training piece is so important, is because if we don't take command of our attention, if we don't go out of our way and purposefully brain train, we have already, the default is that social media and the news cycle are already commanding our brain habits, right? And so it's very important for him to know how to use his technology, know when to turn the phone off, when to turn notifications off, right? Proactively schedule time for when he's going to be on Snapchat or whatever it is, right? And be able to dictate, I'm going to study for 3 hours and I'm going to command my attention for these 3 hours and have that sort of control.
Oh, it's a huge asset. I mean, for life and planning, and also control over your emotions. I mean, if you think about great relationships, not entirely, but a big part of them is having control over your emotions. Like you think about long-term commitments, marriage, things like that. It's oh, wow, I'm being wildly unreasonable here. I probably shouldn't make a capital case out of this, even if my emotions are telling me otherwise, right? Like regulating that or jealousy with friends or envy or, or managing disappointment. Like you just go off the handle. And we all know people that kind of never got that training as kids and carried it into adults, and they tend to not have the best, it's hard for them. So a lot of that self-awareness I think is hugely critical. And I'm sure the work you're doing with Sensei helps with that a lot.
Yeah. I mean, and I would share that, part of my recovery, the aha that I had when I discovered neurofeedback was that I could go in and rewire my story about my motor vehicle accident so that I could actually face the fear, the shame, the frustration, all of that. And that really liberated me. And the aha was that that's actually the same process that you go through when you're doing spiritual practice, when you're doing inner work, that might be the term people use. And so when you're looking at it from a leadership perspective, that is about me understanding my typical habits. Why am I reactive when this comes up, right? And being aware of that. It's very difficult for us to self-reflect on that and be truly honest about it. And if we're functioning at this very superficial sort of beta state where we're not going deep enough. And so the concept that I learned from that and I brought into this system is how can we build that resilience layer so that people with beta and alpha training, so that people can then deep dive into alpha theta and do that inner work in a way that's quite safe, quite methodical, but also empowered. You don't have to go to a counselor to do that if it's just regular day-to-day stuff.
Yeah. If you're listening and this sounds interesting, Sensei, check out the website, check out the product. It's Sens.ai is the website. And Paula, you also are, I believe you're hiring right now for a couple key positions. Do you want to give a shout out for who you're looking for on the team?
Yeah, we're hiring for a couple of marketing roles that are going to be really critical for us to move the needle on how do we maintain the authentic message and also, increase top of funnel, right? So this issue that we're having, how do we get some really senior people in who believe in the mission and want to contribute?
Great. And if you got someone who, are you looking for someone who's been doing it for 3 or 4 years? Are you looking for like a 10-year marketing online veteran, and who, maybe give a little more detail if you would about who you're looking for, and then where they can find you if they're interested in applying?
Yeah. Well, I think it could be either, honestly. We're looking for 2 people. And we're looking for people who already have the skills. You know what? Okay, I'll give you a profile. An ideal person would be someone who's already got the skills. They've lived and breathed the fear-based marketing. They understand how the system works, but maybe they've had some shifts in their life, and they're like, you know what? I think there's a way to marry this sort of thinking and still be successful with something that's actually more authentic, with something that's actually more altruistic. And I'd like to do work that's just really meaningful.
Love it. Would be great to cap this off with quick lightning round. So you haven't seen these questions. I'm going to give them to you, and feel free to just answer in a couple words or 1 or 2 sentences. But a first question: what's one of the fondest memories from your childhood?
Ooh, you know what? Really, really simply, just being like in the backyard with just one of my first dogs. His name was Thunder, and my mom and my dad. Very simple. Sunshine, sort of just playful, without an agenda, sort of day.
Nice. If you weren't living where you are now, where would you live?
Somewhere sunnier. You know what? I live in Whistler right now, and I love it. But it gets a bit dark and cold. Portugal comes to mind. I've been thinking about Lisbon a bit lately. Might be fun to try that out.
I feel you. I made a move from the north to the south for sun and warmth, so I hear you on that one. What's the hardest part of your business?
Right now, it's about scaling. Hiring is onerous.
Favorite book, resource, or podcast on the brain or neurofeedback, or just the mind in general?
I've been reading the book The Source by Dr. Tara Swart. And what I love about it is that it marries the journey of consciousness development with neuroscience. And she's a neuroscientist. So I've been finding that quite delightful.
Interesting. The Source. I'll have to check that out. The perennial favorite for the show: how much money in the bank is enough? And just a warning, people always sometimes will say money doesn't matter, and I'll warn you, I'll give you, I'm kind of a bulldog on asking at least a second time, but you can answer this 1 to 2 ways. You can either say a lump sum in the bank that you have for the rest of your life, or a certain amount per year in terms of an annual income. But it's an amount that, like, if you didn't make any more, you'd be fine. You'd be able to live a great life, but this would be enough to kind of do what you want to do in life and have a fulfilling, happy life. So very broadly, how much is enough?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's funny. I have discussed this in the past with co-founders. So I do have a number in mind, and it's 20 million. But it's based on not. I don't need 20 million, right? I need 20 million to fund my own future visions as well, right? So how I intend to contribute to the world, and for family, etc.
Yeah. I love that you've thought about that. I always think it's a super interesting question. How many hours a week do you work?
Yeah, doing a company that is so close to my heart, and because we do work from home, it's so integrated that it's hard to calculate. If I had to calculate, because it definitely does spill into the weekends, um, you know, definitely more than 40, but so maybe 50, so yeah. But what's nice is to have control about when you're going to work and to be able to work when you have inspiration to work. So it's not a slog.
What's your number one hobby, or one of your favorite hobbies, and you can't say work or anything related to the brain?
Hmm. You know what? I love skiing. And it's been actually tough getting a lot of ski days in since my motor vehicle accident. And part of my recovery has been motivated by getting back on the mountain more frequently. So I love skiing because you're so in flow, and you're so immersed in nature, right? So that's why I live in a ski town. So yeah, I love skiing.
Yeah, you got a phenomenal backdrop for that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And then last question: who's one of the most interesting people you've met through your e-commerce or entrepreneurial career?
Hmm. Oh, that's a really tough one, Andrew.
Doesn't have
Okay.
to be like the definitive person, but just someone notable that you had, just think is impressive or admire.
Yeah, who comes to mind to me is Dr. Olivia Leslar, that I met just in the last year. And what I love about her is that she is very fearlessly busting domains, like in the medical field. Like she will attend, like she's very much into health span, right, and into medical science of that. Um, but she will go to like chiropractor conferences and like CrossFit stuff. And she just, and she'll be in a room full of heart surgeons and be like the only non-heart surgeon, like she's just very interested in that cross domain sort of knowledge, and just quite a curious person and learner.
Nice. Very cool.